Hello and welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast. I'm Oscar Brummel, and today my guest is Stuart McCune of the project CYESS. CYESS is a newer, harsh noise project with very forward-thinking tendencies and sound. Stuart is originally from Belfast, but he's living in Switzerland currently, and he's been around and he's seen a lot, and he's a pretty interesting guy. There's a new CYESS CD coming out very soon on White Centipede Noise called Richter, which is actually what you're hearing in the background. If you're a fan of White Centipede Noise Podcast, please support it via Patreon at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Hey, Stuart.
Hey, Oscar.
Welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast. Thank you for joining me on this sunny afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned in the intro briefly who you are and what you do, but your project here, CYESS, it's a fairly new harsh noise project to my knowledge. I take it you've been involved in music and experimental music for some time now, but this incarnation that I'm familiar with of this project has kind of appeared pretty suddenly and recently, I would say. Can you just tell me a little bit about the transformation and progression of that project from what it started at to what it is now? Because I remember reading that it was sort of a collective or a duo, and you've had a quite varied, I think, residence around the world, it seems. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit. But can you just talk about the project first and what it started as and what it is now?
Yeah, it started, the name began maybe a few months before COVID properly hit. I was living just outside of Rome. And if you remember back then, Rome kind of got hit before everyone else. We were like a few months ahead of the rest of Europe in terms of the effect of COVID. And I started it properly maybe right at that time. And I wanted to go back to noise for a long time. And I figured if I don't do it, I won't do it. So I spent maybe a year just making rubbish, like just nonsense, trying to figure out exactly what was in my head. And during that time, I was open to collaboration, and I knew this fantastic drummer called Judita, and she's one of the best I've ever heard. She was incredible and very experimental with her drumming as well. So she would bring her kids up to this area outside of Rome to get them away from Rome, basically. So then during COVID, whenever it wasn't complete lockdown, she could come over to the house, and we had a massive house and with the drum kit set up and the amps and things. And initially it started out with guitar and drums to just see if we could replicate something live. And pretty much immediately we got contacted by a club called Clang in Pineto in Rome whenever there was a dip in the restrictions, and we played a gig, but it was very much it was more of a experimental improvisational thing rather than strictly noise. And it was very well received, and it did okay, but it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what was in my head. So I told Judita that she had to go, and the moment I did that, somehow, for some reason, it was the right thing to do. And very, very quickly, the sound began to connect, and I began to focus on exactly what I wanted to create. And the earliest version of that, just before I left Italy, was the Flickering Horses tape that came out on Industrial Coast. And by that stage, I'd already moved fully into more. I'd started doing some wall stuff that nobody heard. And then I realized that that wasn't quite right either. And I just sat down one day and went, right, okay, to make what you want to make. And I made Ernst. And I think Ernst was the tape that caught your attention and quite a few other people. Matthew at Rural Isolation Project liked Ernst as well. And then it just formed really, really quickly after Ernst, the direction I wanted to go, and more specifically what I wanted to do with noise, because noise has always been there for me. And I felt like I wasn't hearing. We can come back to this later, but I felt I needed to move as forward as I could in as short a space of time as possible without flooding releases of just nonsense that don't need to be out there. So I started really intensively working at that point, I think after Ernst.
You mentioned coming back to noise.
Yeah.
So if you could maybe just talk about your history before that.
The first big stepping stone, whenever I was about 10 or 11, my parents took me to a record store and said at Christmas, pick something, and I picked a cassette of the Velvet Underground and Nico, and I really didn't like the Lou Reed stuff, but I did like the kind of noisier stuff, and that's where I first, if I had to put it back to one thing, I think it would be that started on a certain path. And then during the 80s, you just went further down that road. There was a lot of so-called noise bands in the 80s, like American and like indie bands like Butthole Surfers and Big Black and Pussy Galore, Sonic Youth. And so I'd listen to these a lot. And then my oldest friend, my best buddy, is a guy called Alan Cummins, who has done a lot of translations on noise over the years. He's good friends with KG Hino. And anyway, so whenever we were like, I think we were like 14 or 15, we both got guitars and we were like recording like just noise versions of things like Teenage Jesus and stuff, like the Lydia Lunch stuff, just noise, just distortion pedal and going for it. And around the same time, I can remember like Napalm Death were coming out, and we were loving that, that it was basically just these blasts of noise because they were just doing things so short. And we heard like Napalm Death through, in the UK, there was a Radio 1 late night DJ called John Peel, who was very influential. And we heard it there. And one night John Peel played this piece of music, and straight away, I think I was with Al at the time, and straight away I can remember going, this is it. What was that? That's it. And it was Hanatarash. And that was the real moment. It was Hanatarash, and that was like, okay, this is it.
Now available at Oxen Records, Incapacitance, Oxen Man's Uneasiness CD, Nobody, Woods and Wires CD, title still available, Dressing, From the Body to the Door CD, Purgist, Heartsink CD, Scum and Unsustainable Social Condition, Necessary Downfall CD, Leah P., Surviving the Familiar CD, available at oxenrecords.bigcartel.com.
So then the thing that Hanatarash brought us to was Alchemy, and ordering direct from Alchemy was the next massive turning point, because that's whenever I got the first Incapacitants. And Incapacitants have been the defining group of my life. They've been with me my whole life. I have every release, I was able to get. And even though I've lost so much over the years and things were stolen and everything, that in some great way, the incapacitance stuff is still with me. It's still on the shelf.
Nice.
So, and bizarrely, over all this time, I've never seen them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Al's seen them loads, and there's always been situations where I was supposed to see them, and then I had to deal with another thing at the time, and so
They haven't played
that's
that much outside of Japan. I mean, I mean,
um they played enough places where I could have seen them,
yeah.
and it still annoys me a bit. But even when I was young, I've got the videos, and I've seen lots of footage of them playing. I've seen other guys playing from the same kind of school of Japan noise, but yeah, I'm just glad that they exist. They're just like the best thing in the
Yeah.
world.
Okay, so you were still in Belfast at this time, right?
Were we? Well, it was in Belfast when we heard an Atarash. And then I think the first Alchemy delivery, was it? I think we might have been in London by that stage. I mean, we got other deliveries from places around the world too. Like, I remember ordering from New York, like Pier Platters. We got like lots of like early kind of industrial stuff like controlled bleeding and survival research laboratories, and
Mm-hmm.
like the atavistic stuff like Richard Cairn, and um but yeah, the first delivery of Alchemy, I'm pretty sure we were in London by that stage, and yeah, that was just clouds parting moment. I think I got three. No, I couldn't have had three. Definitely got Fabrication on that, and I got Windom by Hiju Kaidan, and Romance by Hiju Kaidan. I think that
Mm-hmm.
was the first delivery. And then on the next delivery, I got all the rest of Incapacitance that I could find. So,
Nice. What prompted you to leave Belfast?
um, well, nothing really. I'd always wanted to move to London when I was a teenager, and then it was the first chance I got, really. I was supposed to go to art college, and I didn't. And Al was going to London to study Japanese. At the very last moment, I decided, yeah, I'm just going to go and skate and drink, and so I
Skateboard?
applied. Yeah, so there was a process in the UK called clearing, where for on one day they release the spaces still available at university,
Mm-hmm.
and so I knew this was the easiest way to do it. So I just applied to this place, this in the University of London, and they said, well, you'd have to fly over here tomorrow morning. And I said, okay, and went, and then they phoned me up that night and said, yeah, you're in. So I ended up doing a degree in philosophy and theology, but I didn't really. But
It was
I
all about
skated
skating and
like
drinking, or
a
what?
man and went to America and stuff instead. But so yeah, so then we went to London, and like it was a cool time. There's a great photo of me and Al, I think, on our first day, and we looked so grunge before grunge happened. Actually, it was happening, I suppose, at the time. A week later was the first Nirvana show outside of America, and it was at Al's college.
Wow.
There's a book somewhere with me and Kurt in it.
Like you
Um,
knew him, or were you just in a photo with
we
him, or?
met we met at whenever they were back at the end of the European tour a few months later. But I knew lots of other guys that. So yeah, so that summer I went to DC to stay with a friend I'd met in London, a girl called Michelle, and Michelle's boyfriend I was living in New York, and she was like, DC's a bit boring. Do you want to go to New York? And I was like, yeah, of course I want to go to New York. And we went up to New York, and her boyfriend was a guy who passed away now called David Berman. He had a very influential band called Silver Jews.
Yeah.
And he was also in Silver Jews was Steve Malcolmus, who's Pavement.
Yep.
And Bob Nastanovich. So I stayed with David, and then him and Michelle were having a big barney about something. So Bob said, "Do you want to stay with me?" And I went and stayed with Bob in Hoboken for a while. That was great. Just got to got to see so much stuff, and that's where I crossed paths with Eddie. I think because they all worked at the Whitney Art Museum as security guards, and one of the security guards was Eddie's roommate, who was in Cop Shoot Cop.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Have you guys, I mean, you guys kind of made that connection on the video party thing. Have you guys caught up about it and confirmed those details? And
yeah, I sent him a message before Christmas, and he wrote back, and we sent the odd email. It's cool. He's a nice guy. Like,
funny, yeah. Got far out. So what was your connection to that music scene at that time? Were you just kind of like friends with it, or were you also doing music?
Was I? Yeah, I had a 4-track, so I just started making noise, and I don't think anybody had heard anything, but I remember playing it to David, and David was very encouraging about it. I remember he gave me Big Black's Racer X cassette as a prize for making a good racket. So then after that summer, I came back to London, and I started a band. And then the band did quite well, but whenever it was supposed to go to the next level, I wasn't into it because it was like a band.
Mm-hmm.
So I split it up at that point because it just wasn't really what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I still knew loads of bands, and I'd see lots of people coming through London that was always great. You know, you'd meet people that were just awesome, like Royal Trucks. Royal Trucks were just great, you know, because they were friends of David's, and it was all worked out. And then like Sonic Youth, because Pavement were touring with them, so it was like a big party thing.
Cool.
But it's all name dropping bullshit that you do when you're a kid. You know, it doesn't mean anything. It's just people.
It's still history, though.
But it is. It's just history. And the thing that's different about it is that I feel like so much of history is getting rewritten with a certain tint of glass. And I know this is inevitable, but there are things that are lost. And getting back to the noise, the thing that was great about noise back then was that it wasn't segregated. It wasn't isolated. Mm-hmm. You know, you'd see, you know, maybe Nitzareb one night, Cows the next, and then White House at the end of the week, or Coil, or, you know, there was just a different, you just went to see music. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, this is something, you know, that is not this. It was, everything was together, and that was great.
Yeah.
And it was connected with lots of other things that we associate with noise that have kind of faded away.
Like what?
Well, okay. Well, a good example would be there was before the internet, there basically was this book that was the internet. And if you look at it now, it's insane how accurate it is about how the internet works. But it was a catalog basically of all the extreme shit you could get anywhere in the world. And it was called a mock. Mm-hmm. And you used to love getting the new mock catalog because it just had everything. Like everything from, I can't say the stuff because things will flag if I say what was in it. But everything you can imagine was in it, right? Or
Yeah.
where to get it, stuff like that. And it was like we came to a mock, I think, through. Do you remember those research books?
Yeah.
So it was through that you find a mock, and then a mock just had everything.
Was it music and art, or more of the ephemera?
Everything.
Okay.
Porn, terrorism,
Yeah.
music, art,
But
anything that was
it
extreme
included the
in the
music and art
world.
with it. It wasn't like just the other stuff. It was like also advertising the music and art and bands and
No,
labels and
it
stuff.
wasn't. It wasn't like it wasn't a magazine. It was like a telephone directory,
Okay.
but like with like ad after ad.
Yeah.
So you could, if you want, like they would have a section on say it was called industrial music,
Yeah.
particularly in America back then, even though
Yeah.
it wasn't industrial. So a mock was one of those things that has kind of fallen away from history, but a mock basically was the internet in a book. Like everything from your right-wing idiot to your, left-wing beatnik.
Yeah.
I know. And all in between.
And why do you think that stuff has faded away, or what has happened
Well,
there?
it's because you can just get everything you want now just straight away. Whereas back then it was like a mission. You had to hunt things out.
Yeah.
It's like I said about us ordering direct from Alchemy. You couldn't get Alchemy stuff in a record shop, outside of Japan because just nobody was buying it. Nobody knew what it even was. I can remember playing the early stuff to people and they wouldn't. They just couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
And I understand that now, but I couldn't understand it then. But I mean, there's even within that, there's things that have fallen away, like, Hiroshima or reissue and all that stuff on vinyl, which I think is, I prefer it to be reissued on CD, the format it was in originally, but I don't need it, I have it. But there's things that they miss as well from that era, like, you know who KK Null is?
Yeah. Of course.
Okay, so with Zenigava and stuff, he went further into what now you'd call sludge or doom or but the Null solo stuff on his Nux, the Null cassettes from the 80s, like they're great. They're just like straight noise experimentation. Granted, most of it is done with a guitar, like Soul Mania kind of style, but they're great. Nobody's reissued them.
Yeah.
They're really worth revisiting. And I feel it's that I miss. I miss that there's no. I sound so old. I miss this. I miss that. No, but I do. It brings me so much joy when I still listen to them, and it brings me joy even thinking about when we would get these things back then.
Yeah.
And there's something has definitely been lost. With
Do you think? What do you think it's about? Do you think it's about the over genreification of noise, or why do certain things get kind of, I don't want to say overhyped, but why do certain things get really lionized and canonized, and other things just kind of forgotten about? Is it just the quality, or what? Is there something else going on there?
There's something else going on there. I feel very, very strongly about the idea of noise, and I have never thought of it as something harsh. I've always thought of it as being beautiful, almost rapturous, and I feel brings it right back. The reason I wanted to do CYESS is that I don't feel it's going forward. I feel by this stage of listening to noise, virtually my whole life, we should be in a different place. And obviously, I wouldn't be here without McCawa or McKinley's idea of what noise is. But it's just what two dudes said one day.
Yeah.
It's not what we have to keep doing,
Yeah.
you know? And again, utmost respect, not dissing them at all. You know,
Yeah.
I love this stuff. So,
Of course.
but I feel like there's too much importance placed. I remember there's a McCawa interview where he actually says something about not repeating anything. And, you know, there are incapacitated stuff now where stuff is repeated, you know.
Yeah.
I understand it with the theory, and it's the same with Sam's harsh noise wall theory. I understand everything about it, and I totally respect what it did. But that's like 20, 30 years ago now. And if this was an art movement, it would have already been superseded maybe like 5 times by now.
Sure.
And we don't have to keep making things to that template for it to be. And it feels like it's gone more and more in that direction. Whereas if it's not on one of the others, either one of those two templates, then, that's not noise. Mm-hmm. Of course it is. Of course it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so with CYESS, right from the beginning, this was where I wanted to go. I was like, I'm sick of waiting. I think this attitude of standing around, we shall wait and the world catches up with what we're into, that's absolute nonsense. You need to move the thing forward. So I started thinking hard about why that hasn't happened. And for me, I'm going to go deep into this. Yeah, you want me to
go?
For me, everything's cycles, right? If you want to break a cycle, you have to destroy it. And from destruction in anything on the planet comes creation of something brand new, right? So that has to happen in order for the thing to move forward. So I started thinking about, well, how do you destroy noise? So the only thing that I initially thought about how you would destroy noise to move it forward, to create something new, would be to make unnoise. So maybe silence or field recordings or something like this. But that wasn't satisfying. So then I realized that even if you put those elements into it, this unnoise, that what that does is where the path is to the destruction. Because what it does is not necessarily with tonality or notation or anything, but the destruction of noise can come through structure. That doesn't mean it has to repeat. It just means if there's a structure there, then the noise somehow can be destroyed. And I feel like instead of like a lot of noise people, I know a lot of people are much, much younger, so that they're in that phase where they like to like, you know, it sounds negative, but I don't mean it. You'll see where I'm going, where they like laud it over people. I listen to this extreme thing and you don't, kind of attitude. But I think that it's those people that we should be targeting. We shouldn't be just targeting the people who don't listen to noise. We should be targeting the people who make noise and listen to noise. We should make them uncomfortable so that they have to ask themselves the question, well, why do I not like this? What is it about this that I don't like? So that then we eventually destroy the noise and make something new and move the whole idea of the thing forward. We had an experience about this recently.
Yeah.
Where there was an element of tonality in something. And for me, at this point, maybe that wasn't the time to do that. It's always better for something to be more established and respected and then really hit them with the heat. Like then really take them somewhere where they're not happy, where they're not comfortable, where you're destroying the thing in order to create something brilliant and new to move the whole thing forward. I'm not saying that there are not people out there who are being like individually creative. There are, and that's great, and they're new people and it's brilliant. but it's still within a rule book. And I think if you're going to advance the idea of noise, you need to make the people that make noise or listen to noise, it's those people need to be uncomfortable in equal measure with the people that don't listen or make it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and I think structure for me is the experiment at the moment where I'm seeing how people react with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because my stuff, although a lot of it might sound improvised, they're like, particularly the Tapier's tape. I was messaged Eric Nystrand wanted to know a little bit more, so I messaged him like a little more in-depth thing about the structure of the tape.
Mm-hmm.
And because he wanted to know how it related to the artist.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, without going into all the detail of it here, an easy thing to hit on would be that there's a track on it called Triul, which translates from Catalan as 3 eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to it, I make my own shaker boxes, and they have like a theremin quality where I can manipulate the feedback tone.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a 3-tone feedback tenet that gets repeated at 3 times. So a 3-note thing that's repeated 3 times is the 3 eyes. And that's how it relates back to the artist.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
So I forget where I was going now. So the structure that is going into that, I feel it, once you know that, it might ruin it for some people, but for other people it might not. And if you let people know that it's okay to perhaps put structure or even a strange tonality into something, in order to at least try to keep going forward, instead of just standing still, pretending that the world is going to catch up. The world hasn't caught up because they're not going to. If you want noise to move in a new direction, you have to push. You have to at least try things to make it different than it currently is.
But what about people who don't want it to go in a new direction? What about people who don't want it to
like
be
the 60s
different?
People not liking punk. It's just a ridiculous argument. Things have to go in a new direction. That's evolution. It's what life is. Any kind of music evolves, and it feels like it's taken a long time for noise to evolve. So I'm just trying things to try to see if one of these things connects or destroys to a point where something occurs to me where it's like, oh, perhaps if this happens, then everyone hates it, and this becomes then something new for the generation after me.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than me specifically wanting to be, oh, I'm the guy saying noise forward. I just want to move forward. I don't want to stand still.
Mm-hmm.
There's no point in me trying to replicate things I love like Makawa or adhering to Sam's almost manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like 30 and 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm so passionate about the concept and the feeling of noise that I do feel that it needs to be explored more. And if in order to do that, you're going to make stuff which people think is terrible and which maybe is terrible. But it's better than not trying. Just because you want the appreciation of your peers, oh, that's good noise. Well, if you can make good noise, make more than good noise.
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with you, but I'm just playing devil's advocate about some things. I mean, why does something have to go forward? Because, for example, I often use this analogy of food. Like, if I love pizza, and I think pizza is like the traditional Italian recipe for pizza is like the highest, at least for my taste, thing that we can achieve with pizza. I mean, might I just say, oh, well, I don't want a new kind of pizza. I want this kind of pizza because it's the
Yeah,
best.
you're making the error of saying that the pedal has to change. The pedal is the pedal, the pizza is the pizza, but food changes.
Yeah.
The food of today is not the same as the food of 100 years ago, or even 50 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, the food of today is much healthier than it was even whenever I was growing up. So food changes. So the pizza changes, but the pedal doesn't change. You
Right.
know, the Orange Boss pedal's still the Orange Boss pedal, or the DOD, or whatever it is that you think is in your box of tricks. But so you're making the mistake of confusing the element with the overall concept.
Yeah, I understand. But to kind of we had kind of a back, yeah, you mentioned we had kind of a back and forth issue about the Richter CD, which is coming out soon on White Centipede Noise, and your work does have a very, very, you say you call it structure, but I call it, I would call it musicality, and I think the important difference I want to make with it is musicality
I
versus
think
music.
no,
Sorry.
I think the difference is notation. And on the thing we disagreed about, and you were completely correct, there was notation. And the reason I put it in the first place was just for badness, was just because I knew that a White Centipede market would just go, what is this? Why is there notes in this? And then I realized that this isn't the time to do that. You know, wait until they know that you can. It's like old free jazz musicians used to have to put a standard on the
Yeah.
album to convince people they could play the jazz standards before they could convince them of this crazy noise improvisation they were doing.
Sure.
So it's a similar thing. So now's the time to put the standard to make the good noise album, and then once people know that I can do that, then maybe I go, okay, try it with this. You know.
I see what you're saying, but what I was saying is like the musicality of noise in terms of the structure, the composition. I mean, that's why I do really like to. I am really of the opinion that noise is music. I don't see it as separate. I do see it fully as music, and I think in terms of its intentional sound and composed and structured sound, even if the composition is accidental or sloppy or improvised, that it's still very intentional sound to achieve certain emotional response or trigger something in anything. But what I see is this: what's the separation for me is not musicality of noise, but incorporating certain parts of Western music into noise. Because that to me is an element that oftentimes just bothers me on a personal level. I wouldn't say it's wrong, but just I want it, that to me goes back to the kind of music that we hear in TV commercials and on the radio and in record stores. You hear this certain type of music and it's fine, but for some reason to go to that from noise, which I see as the music of really opening and that feels to me like a constriction. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. So the first thing about that would be, no matter who we are in this community of listeners and makers, every single one of us, even if it's only a small percentage, even if it's only 5% of what we all listen to, there is a percentage of what we listen to that's not noise. You listen to hip hop, for example, right?
Of course, yeah.
So all of us listen to another form of music,
Yeah.
right? Now, in that other form of music, if you heard noise being incorporated, like clipping in hip hop, you go, oh, it's fantastic. Noise is in clipping, or noise is in Vince Staples. Somebody said recently in Dillaway, was it?
Yeah.
And it would be the same if it was, if you were in, if you heard noise being put into opera or something, you'd be like, oh, there's noise in the opera, isn't that great? But if it was the other way around, you'd be like, what's that doing in my noise? That's no good in my noise. It's like the old guy going, no. Just, it's ridiculous standpoint to have. If it's personal taste, there's nothing can be done about that. That's okay. If it's just something that jars on the individual, that's completely understandable. But we should not be closed to the idea of in the inverse, in the way that we'd like it if noise was in other music. Why do we not like it if other music is in noise? And for me, I agree to a point. I don't like music in noise. For me, it ruins it. But that's not really where I'm wanting to go. I'm talking more about less free jazz improvisation, because basically you're doing the same thing. You're twisting a button on a piece of metal, and that's what you're doing if you're playing the saxophone, so it's less improvisation and more concentrated structure to see where it goes, just to see what it could possibly lead to, I think is more what I'm thinking.
I agree. I think, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love your work, and that's why I care about it. And that's what I definitely picked up on the first time I heard any of it. You mentioned your Ernst tape, and like I got this in we kind of did a trade, and it was sort of a random trade. I wasn't sure what to expect, and you also described it at the time as wall noise, and I thought, well, okay, I don't know, I'll check it out. And then I put it on, and a lot of times, sometimes I get trades for stuff, and it takes me a long time before I even throw it on. It's just like I get stuff, and packages are here, and things are piling up, and noise tapes are all over, and I don't necessarily put everything on right now, but for some reason it grabbed me, and I fucking threw it in, and I was like, holy shit, this is really excellent. And it was exactly that. It was very, very dense, harsh noise, but very, very structured and purposeful. And even without the side that has the more tonal elements of it, it was the A side, which is very static, or it has static elements, the textural elements. Even within those, that's what I love. That's what I especially love, is that within all that harsh noise was all of this very intentional structure. And that was really, and that's what I hear through all of your work. And so, but back to your point about noise in music is celebrated and music and noise is not. The reason for me that is the case is because I really do put noise on a pedestal above any of the other music I listen to. The other music I listen to is like, for me, it's like entertainment. It's like, okay, I can put, I listen to rap music because it's like it's like fast food to me.
Yeah,
it's like something I put on, or rock music, classic rock, whatever. I'll put it on and be like, oh, this is cool, I like this, but it doesn't. Very, very rarely do other genres of music like have that same effect on me and mean that much to me as noise does. So they're more kind of like, I don't know the proper word for it, but they're more like take it or leave it, something to kind of enjoy and get some.
I completely appreciate that.
So that when
feel
that,
like they're
when
not
that
as deep or something, they don't have the same.
Exactly. So it's kind of more like I don't want to say it's cheap. I mean, I love music, but it's like it's a different kind of experience. And noise is so serious to me and so special to me. So that when I see when I have this world of noise, which is really a different experience, I consider it music, but I consider it a higher form of music. At least maybe not technically or not objectively, but from my experience, that when and then it brings in some rock or some 4/4 beats, I'm just like, let's bring it back down.
Yeah, no, the drums, a repetitive drum changes it to a different style of music. Changes it to industrial music, so that's a different thing that's already been done. So I'm not talking about that, but I agree with you completely about the elevation that we give to noise, and it's more that it's the way it forces us to listen to it rather than we give it back. But there are two things that vaguely do it, but it's because they're doing the same thing that we like about noise, but noise just does it more. And the two things are free jazz and concrete. Both of those elements, or like perhaps even if you include avant-garde, classical, like Xenakis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They do the same thing that we enjoy that noise does for us. If it's someone like you or me who's really deeply listening, and deeply listening's even wrong. It's just, it is a different experience.
Yeah. And
it's
maybe
a different listening experience.
And I don't know what results you'll have exploring structure further. I think it's great and you should, but I think what I find with noise is I really like what I think most important about it for me is that it's an open vessel because of its lack of structure or very vague structure or chaotic structure. It's hard to pin down. It's like an open vessel for my own thoughts or mind or meditation, empty, it's whatever, but I can put my emotions into it, whereas most music gives you some sort of emotion. So I think
I have to emphasize, sorry to interrupt, but I have to emphasize I'm not speaking about repetition.
Sure.
You know, I'm not talking about our recognition even. I'm not talking about after a while, perhaps you would recognize it moves from this point to that point.
Yeah.
But I'm not talking about repetition. I'm talking about just a preconceived framework that you're going to create this in.
Yes.
Rather than it just be a stream of consciousness.
Yes.
Release.
And I totally get that. And I'm just, you know, I do think though that is there this spectrum from chaos to structure. If it, you know, that's the sliding scale, and I wonder if potentially the more and more structure, I mean, if it got to a certain degree of structure, that it's then it then has a different effect on the brain, just on the ears, you know, on a psychoacoustic level.
Absolutely.
Hearing it.
I mean, I don't know if I'm going to feel. I'm going to try my damnedest not to, but you know, I'm still going to try. I'm still not going to sit down and just make a good noise album like anyone else can make, or like an individually creative noise album like anyone else can make. I want to try to do something that I could fall on my face. Like we could interview again in a year, and I go, "Yeah, that what was I talking about? That was nonsense," you know. But at the moment, I'm going to try a few things to see where it leads or what happens, or see if somebody else does it. And already there's a couple of people have even contacted me and said that they've not copied, but they've been influenced by some of the things that I've been doing over the past year, and they can definitely hear it in their own work.
Yeah.
And that's all I need. I just wanted to get out there and let the idea kind of infiltrate on its own and see what happens. I'm not expecting to be the guy that changes anything, but I want to at least put stuff out there so that maybe the kid of the next guy changes it, you know?
I think that I think it's don't get me wrong, I think it's really great and also really important. And I'm wishing for similar things with noise as a whole. I mean, I think some people maybe sometimes misunderstand the fact that I'm not one of the people that's like sick of noise or bored of noise or needs noise to change or become different, but I do just, when I hear noise and then I think about noise, I notice a big gap of what I can hear and what I know how to make and what I can imagine in my mind just vaguely that maybe could be possible. I still don't know how to make it or how to get there or what it is exactly, but I feel like in my mind there are many, 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 many things that are untapped without changing what noise is, and I'm very interested in that, and I really do think a lot of that is very much tied to the gear that we've kind of all been accustomed to using, because that gear, as great as it is and producing beautiful and incredible results, is still very finite, and it's the gear that we use because it's what is inexpensive and relatively easy to use and make, and et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, we're just kind of captive to this set of tools that everyone has kind of passed down to each other, and hey, you make noise with this. But I even think of just that the tools could change, or people start grabbing other tools, things could really go.
But you had her on. That's why Victoria Shen is so important.
Yeah.
That's exactly why she's so important. She is constantly thinking or experimenting with new ways to make sound. And basically it's all sound, it's all waves that we're dealing with. And she's creating these things on a different level. It's why she's so valuable to this music. I seen an Instagram thing just this week where she's created some kind of magnetic ebow,
Yeah.
and it's like we need that, and perhaps that's what will help it evolve. Because if we just stick to the same hardware, like you said, then it's just like free jazz. The free jazz you make today is exactly the same as the free jazz that was made in the 70s because they're using the same stuff. There's nowhere else for it to go apart from individual creativity.
Yeah.
Whereas if we have different, we're not there yet, so I don't know. But if someone makes the equivalent leap of a distortion pedal, the next thing that makes a sound that hasn't really been recorded before, then that sound will help this music become a different music eventually, a different thing. But it's not necessary to just rely on the hardware.
Of course, yeah.
I think that there has to be a change in direction about how the whole genre is approached by a younger generation wanting to do something. Try to tell them that it doesn't have to be just like an extension of your punk hardcore days. That this is a very different kind of music. You just don't. It's not just something you go and get angry at and scream and go, "Oh, that's great." That's just punk, noise punk stuff. That's not the same thing that we're trying to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And particularly in America, there's this path. It felt like for a long time where you went from like punk to extreme metal to gore metal to noise or something, and it's just so boring. It's like bringing those things to noise just makes noise those things. I think that was your issue with the notation or the tonality. Sure. And it's been able to strive to achieve a balance where bringing something to noise makes noise a different thing or a higher thing, but still noise. That's the trick. That's what we have to try to push towards rather than just bringing the other things to it. I don't know. You get kind of on
for sure. But for me, it still has to have. I mean, that the conceptual, the concepts behind it still have to add up to something the discerning ear wants to hear. And like it is to me, like you said, it's not about harsh noise isn't to me about harshness. It's about beauty, or it's about a certain character of sound that I really enjoy. It's not about destroying sound. It's not about being fucked up, or at least that's my appreciation of it. It's I know that's what it's about for other people. That's fine, but for me, it's really about certain sounds and certain power of sound. Simply, it's a very boring level, but that's really what it's all about. So that also has to be really in the forefront, because I know that it's not like there aren't people who have tried to push things forward and try their things, and a lot of times I hear things right away and I go, nope, not for me. That's like it's not. And I go, okay, well then then I'd rather just listen to incapacitance, for example.
Yeah.
So it's a push and pull for sure. But I think it's great what you're doing, and I think you're onto something very, very good. You've done so. Let's kind of move to your catalog. And so since the past year, I would say, maybe a little longer, I don't know exactly how long, but you've released a good handful of releases across a good handful of labels, and they're all like fully realized album type releases. Maybe not super long, but they're all sizable and complex. And so I've also, obviously noticed, besides Flickering Horses, which I don't think is a reference to an artist, most of them are named after a certain artist in the fine arts.
Well, there was a plan. By the way, Flickering Horses is named after Zoetrope.
Okay. Yeah.
There was a plan then, because Ernst was such a a definite formulation of the idea of the sound, that I was going to make the cassettes based around the work of a fine artist, and then the CDs were going to be based around my own work. But then that all went out the window this particular week because
Okay.
the
Yeah.
Richter's coming out on CD. But I'm much happier that it's coming out on CD. It sounds better than
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so there
It's
was
gonna
an
be.
idea to do the cassettes as based around the work of artists, and then the CDs to be based around my own painting. Like the Americasm CD is all my own painting, and the Crim Cram one, which is out shortly, is called No Bull, One Left Behind, and it's all based around my own painting.
Okay. I didn't realize that. So is that something you are also very involved in for a longer period of
Painting?
time?
Yeah, I've exhibited
Yeah.
most of my life. I've done a lot of stuff, Oscar, but yeah, that was one thing that I did. I still get a lot of offers, but exhibiting fine art is a hassle, and it's
Yeah.
a particular hassle at the minute. I don't like shipping stuff. I don't like having to go there.
Yeah.
I just can't be
Yeah.
bothered anymore. I know there's loads of people who'd love to do this, so let them do it instead of
Yeah.
me. Let
Yeah.
them have the opportunity. I'm not. I just it's. I
Do you feel
still.
like using your visual
I've got a
art on?
painted studio below the music studio.
Oh, cool.
Sorry, what did you
Do
say?
you feel like using your artwork on your noise releases fulfills some of that wish to show your work in that way, and also kind of marry it with
It,
something new?
it makes me. It makes the paintings better because I don't put a painting on the cover because I hold the music in such high regard that the painting that goes on the cover has to be a good painting.
Yeah.
So it's not just anything that's lying around the studio. It's usually a painting that's been lying around the studio for at least a year.
Yeah.
So it's not made to order kind of thing.
I was going to ask you this anyway, but I did ask some people from Patreon if they had any questions from you, and one person asked a question about the name of the project, CYESS, where that comes from. It's spelled CYESS AFXZS. For
Well,
those listening who haven't read it.
it's kind of like if you take the words size and effects and say them in a kind of backwards Twin Peaksy voice, size effects. It's kind of like that. But that's not where the name came from. The name came from wanting a name that didn't have connotations to things in harsh noise that I have no patience for anymore. So I didn't want it to be any reference to anything fetishistic or gore, or because these things have just been done to death. And I mean, you could make a harsh noise band name generator, no problem. Like put in, something to do with death, something to do with blood, and or maybe stockings or something. And next thing so I just didn't want any connotations to anyone else. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
back to the original time, even of first time I seen Hijo Kaidan, I didn't know how to pronounce it. And so I thought that didn't matter. And I started hitting random computer generated words just because every time I thought of a name, it was just rubbish or it had already been done. So I thought, okay, well, if it's going to be something forward, it should be something really forward. And I just started generating random words with random letters, and I had a list of about 10 that I liked, and it didn't seem right either. And then the 11th one straight away, I was like, okay, that's it. Then it was because it made me think of like side effects as well. Because if you say it in my accent, it kind of side effects. It kind of sounds like you're saying side effects, like
Yeah.
medication to a
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
or just like that. This is a different way to approach scale, and that scale is important, and that we should think bigger about the whole thing. So the size effects thing was more about making noise a bigger concept, and I didn't want to overtly say that. So whenever I seen the spelling, I was like, okay, that's perfect. That's like taking it to, in my mind, at least I know that's constantly reminding me to try to take it bigger, because size affects things.
So the spelling was given to you by the program.
The words I had thought of, and then I threw random letters in
I
to
see.
see if I could generate something that implied scale to me, just personally. And then that came up, and I was like, okay, that's going to work.
Okay, so there was another question someone on the Patreon asked, and I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it verbatim, as opposed to paraphrasing, and then I think we'll get to the bottom of it. But the question is, does he think that to make good noise, given that style's experimental background and what such background allows you to consider as noise, one needs to have swallowed a bunch of references and have a certain knowledge of what has been done before?
Say, what's the question?
I think the question
Is the question of this, saying that if you know stuff, you can't make noise, or you need to know stuff to make noise?
No. The question is it's not a diss. No, the question's not a diss. The question is wondering if you think one needs to have
Reference?
knowledge and references of what has come before in the genre in order to.
Oh, in the genre? I thought it was just talking about music in general.
Well, no. In experimental noise, if you need to know
okay,
if you need to know
yeah, definitely.
if you need to know the backgrounds of experimental noise and the different styles in order to and have those references and knowledge in order to make something.
I think with anything, the more knowledge you have, the better chance you have of making something more individual. Not because you'll be copying influences, but because if you didn't know the work of, well, Sam McKinley is a great example for this. If you didn't know his work and you produced something clicky, for example, and thought it was the best thing in the world, and then you discovered his work, you'd be like, oh, he's doing that way better than I did it. I look like an idiot, you know? So you need to know something about, it's like trying to paint without going to a museum and looking at other art. You need to have an appreciation and understanding of the overall concept of what you're doing, and then some kind of background so that you're not just painting another Picasso or making another the Rita recording, you know. Not that I think people could do either of those things, but you understand the point I'm trying to make. I think it is necessary, and it can only benefit your creative endeavor if you have some foundation. If you try to build a house, try to do anything without some kind of basis, it's not going to stand up. You know, you need some knowledge of what you're doing, of, you know, how to achieve what you want to achieve, or if someone has done something before that is very similar to what you feel like doing, then, you know, you can look at that and learn how they came to that point, and then maybe take that point again further, you know. So I think it is 100% necessary in any creative endeavor not to think you can just do it and you're brilliant, because you're not, and you never will be. You need to have some kind of knowledge, some kind of mental amalgam library, whatever way you want to put it, to draw from, than just create like a savant.
Yeah.
Even within more fringe areas, like we're talking about art, even in things like art brut or outsider art. I have art brut on the walls that was made by a doctor in a psychiatric institution. So there's an argument for saying that that is not schooled, but there's still a knowledge base there to create the art. I think it's the same with any kind of endeavor where you're trying to get in what's in here out there. If you want to communicate, you have to communicate in the most fully individual way possible. And if you're replicating something, that communication will instantly be lost if someone knows the thing that you're just copying. But communication only happens creatively if the thing is fully individual. So I'm not saying you have to replicate or be influenced even by things. I mean that it helps you to have a library before becoming a writer, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
You need to read a book.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. Yeah, I mean, I think once again, we're kind of touching on like the two schools I think that there are in terms of attitude about noise. That noise is punk, essentially. Noise is like the most punk thing possible, and it's just like destruction of sound and rejection of everything and pure catharsis or expression versus a crafted and intentional art form.
Well, I think the distinction should be more about live performance and recorded performance. Live performance, you know, get your punk rocks off as much as you want, you know. Most of us have been there, seen that and done it. Not new to us, but if you need to do that, if you're still angsty and hormony, get it out of you, kid, do what you want. But if you want to create something beyond that, you need to either go and look at what people have done in that area before, you know, or just, I think we're going in circles a little bit here about it. But I think that the distinction between expression is a live element. If you're recording any sound, obviously there's a degree of expression in it, but if you overly express the way you would in a live performance, you will never capture the energy of that live performance. Whereas if you concentrate more on the emotion you're trying to convey, and a recording studio setup, you will record more of that intensity that you're trying for if you reel it in a bit and concentrate on the confines of what you're doing, the recording structure, the environment, what you're trying to commit to tape, rather than giving the studio your best performance of your life. You know, it's more about communicating the idea in a studio, and if you want live to be, like say, be as punk rock as you want. Yeah.
What about CYESS as a live project? Have you ever performed live? I mean, you mentioned kind of the earlier experimentation with the project,
but really good documents. There's the very early one with the drummer, which is still okay. It's not great, but it is what it is. But there's a later one that just before I left Rome.
Well, that was awesome. Anything else you want to?
It's good we stayed away from Belfast and all the round the world crap as well, but I can tell you about that sometime.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to know about that. I don't. Yeah, I would like to know that.
But yeah, I hope I didn't sound too preachy, but noise is so important to me, and the reason I'm doing it is important to me. And if I sound weird, I apologize, but it comes from a good place, and I want this music to really move into a different era. And it feels like it's kind of stuck a little bit for the past kind of couple of decades, maybe, well, a decade, so hopefully somebody will pick up the torch, baton, whatever.
I think people are, and people will, and it's you weren't preachy, but that's why I have people on here. Is I have them on here to be preachy. That's the point of this.
Okay. Cool.
This platform is that give everyone a chance. I think that's the important thing also about noise, and you talked about Mikawa's attitude, McKinley's attitude, your attitude. I think it's just important that everyone has develop some sort of attitude or philosophy. Not that it is rigid and never can break or change or evolve, but I think that everyone who's doing this knows why and what they want to do with it. So that's always. I really appreciate your conviction, and I love what you do. And anything else you want to let people know about? There's a CD coming out very soon on White Centipede Noise, hopefully in a couple weeks.
I can't wait for people to hear that. It's been sitting for a little bit, and I have no problem with that. But it's just for me, whenever that one was completed, that was the true successor to Ernst.
Yeah.
And it's just perfect that it's coming out on White Centipede, because it sits in my mind in a nice space being there. It's the right place, home for it,
Excellent. Yeah, it sorry it took a while. I mean, you've been very prolific and very quick, You've been working with these labels that are rather quick these days, like Satatawata, AAD, those guys, they're on top of their game, and I've been pretty.
Oh no, I'm not listening to that. You.
No, but I'm just saying, it's an important piece of your progression and catalog. So I'm glad it's finally coming on.
The thing that I really am happiest with about that is that when we revisited it just very recently, it doesn't seem separate.
Right.
It seems part of the same catalog, and I really like that.
Yeah.
There's quite a few things planned. I don't know how much I should say. There's at least 2 solo tapes.
Mm-hmm.
Only one of them has begun recording, and there are at least 2 collaborations coming. Maybe 3 or 4 if the other 2 get their act together. It's like, it's people say they'll do it and then nothing happens. But there are 2 that I think are definitely going to happen, and I am incredibly excited about them. It's really nice to be collaborating with people.
Cool.
And it's both they've both been mentioned in the course of this. So that's just I don't want to jinx it by saying, but I'm really looking forward to the collaborations, almost more so than my own direction, because I think it'll help my own direction.
Yeah.
And
great.
I can't wait for people to hear. So they probably won't arrive or surface maybe until completely the second half of the year.
Sure.
At the earliest, I suspect.
Yeah.
But maybe one of them I should talk to you about.
Yeah, let's talk.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Stuart. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, man. It's great. Yeah, I love watching the show. It's a bit weird being on it, but just thanks for having me.
It's supposed to be an easy step from watching to.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Being on. I mean, I think. Yeah. I that's one of the great things about noise is the fact that it's all everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone's in it. I mean.
Yeah.
There are fans, of course, that just listen and don't make it, and that's perfectly fine. But it's a very fluid barrier, I think, between creator and appreciator, and
we're all fans.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, we're all fans of everyone else. That's one of the most beautiful things about this music. It's like everyone is just so passionate about somebody else that is doing, you know, is in the same field, and we're like, oh, this person's brilliant. Oh, this person's brilliant. Oh, they're doing really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's much more of a community than we even realize it is. But I think this podcast is one of the things that has definitely helped bring that together, because I haven't been able to tune in to other noise podcasts. They don't they don't have my rhythm, or I can't sit through them. Whereas I think I've watched every WCN.
Cool.
And they're radically different, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's exactly it. And that's why I have this podcast I'm such a fan of so many people that I just want the chance to be able to be like, hey, like, first of all, I want to talk to this person about what they do for my own personal enjoyment and interest. And then it's like, hey, look at this person, you know, listen to what they have to say. I mean, if you haven't, I mean, a lot of people already have, but it's still, that's the fun of it for me. I get a lot of joy out of that. So
it's great.
Yeah. So take care, Stuart. Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Oscar.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
.com/White Centipede Noise. Stuart talks about a CYESS gig in Rome that got very heated. He also talks about his gear and a bit of his technical process, as well as more details about his compositional approach on recent CYESS releases. All that and more is to be found at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. I want to thank everyone who supports the podcast via Patreon. Shout out to the Maniac Circle supporters, and an extra special thank you to Joshua Peer, Casper Sonnet, Christoph Rushak, John Ingram, Dries, DF, and a few others who wish to remain anonymous for being heavy sponsors of White Centipede Noise Podcast. Really appreciate it.